The man walked slowly, his legs heavy like stones. His clothes were torn, covered in dust from days of wandering. His lips were dry, cracked from thirst. His stomach growled loudly, but there was nothing to eat. He had searched every corner of this strange, abandoned planet, but it was empty. He didn't remember how long it had been since he last ate. Maybe 2 days, maybe 3. The only thing he knew was that his strength was fading. He had to find food soon, or he wouldn't survive. The world around him was silent. No wind, no birds, no animals. Only tall, broken towers stood in the distance, covered in glowing blue symbols. They looked ancient, like they had been here for thousands of years. He had no idea who built them. Maybe an alien race long gone. Maybe something worse. He stumbled forward, his boots dragging through the dusty ground. He saw something up ahead, a small pile of something on the ground. Food. His heart pounded as he rushed toward it. It was old, rotten, some kind of alien fruit, but it was covered in a thick layer of black mold. The smell was terrible. He sighed and clenched his fists. He couldn't eat this. If he did, he would die even faster. He dropped to his knees, exhaustion taking over. His vision blurred. His hands trembled. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was where his journey ended. Then he heard it. A soft sound, like footsteps. His heart skipped a beat. He wasn't alone. Slowly, he turned his head, scanning the ruins around him. Nothing moved. The silence stretched. Had he imagined it? No. There it was again. A whisper. The hair on his neck stood up. His breathing became slow and careful. His instincts screamed danger. He wasn't sure if it was an animal, a person, or something else entirely. But he knew one thing. He was being watched. He stood up slowly, ignoring the weakness in his legs. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice rough. No answer. His eyes darted around the ruins. He saw nothing but shadows. But shadows could hide many things. Then, from behind one of the tall, ancient structures, something stepped forward. It was tall and thin, its body glowing faintly under the strange purple sky. It had smooth silver skin, like liquid metal. Its eyes were large, golden, and unblinking. It looked almost human, but not quite. He froze, his body tense. An alien. The creature tilted its head slightly, watching him. It didn't speak. It didn't move closer. It simply stared. His mind raced. Was it friendly? Was it dangerous? Should he run? Should he fight? His stomach growled again. He felt weak, dizzy. If this thing wanted to kill him, he wouldn't be able to stop it. Then, without a word, the alien lifted its hand. In its palm was a small, glowing orb. The man's eyes narrowed. The orb pulsed softly, as if alive. He didn't know what it was, but one thing was clear. The alien was offering it to him. He hesitated. Was this a trick? A test? The alien took a step forward. "Eat," it said in a soft, melodic voice. The man's heart pounded. He didn't know if he could trust it. But he had no choice. He was starving. He needed to survive. Slowly, carefully, he reached out his hand and took the orb. The orb felt warm in his hands, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. The man hesitated, his fingers tightening around the strange, glowing object. His body screamed for food, but his mind whispered caution. He had no idea what this was. The alien girl watched him in silence, her golden eyes unblinking. Her silver skin shimmered under the dim purple sky. She looked peaceful, almost kind, but there was something unreadable in her gaze. The man swallowed hard. He had 2 choices: eat and risk the unknown, or refuse and starve. His stomach twisted painfully, making the choice for him. Slowly, he lifted the orb to his lips. The moment it touched his tongue, it dissolved, turning into a rush of warm energy that spread through his body like fire. His limbs tingled. His exhaustion vanished. Strength returned to his muscles. The hunger that had been clawing at him for days disappeared in an instant. He gasped, his eyes wide. He had never felt anything like this before. What was that? He asked, his voice hoarse. The alien girl tilted her head slightly, studying him. Sustenance, she said simply. It was more than that. It wasn't just food, it was something else entirely. Something powerful. He looked down at his hands, flexing his fingers. He felt stronger than he had in weeks, maybe even stronger than ever before. He turned his eyes back to the alien girl. Who are you? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a slow step closer, as if measuring his reaction. I am not your enemy, she said finally. But you are not safe here. The man frowned. Not safe. He had been wandering this dead, abandoned world for days and had seen nothing but ruins. Safe from what? The alien girl's golden eyes darkened slightly. The ones who left this place in ruin. A chill crawled up his spine. He had assumed this planet was empty, forgotten. But the way she spoke, the way her gaze flickered toward the darkened horizon, told him otherwise. There's someone else here, he asked, his voice quieter now. She nodded. Not someone. Many. The air felt suddenly heavier, as if the ruins around them were holding their breath. He looked around, searching for any signs of life. The silence stretched on, thick and unnatural. How do you know? He asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she raised one slender hand and pointed toward the tallest structure in the distance, a jagged, broken tower covered in glowing blue symbols. They will come soon. The man clenched his jaw. He had spent days searching these ruins for anything useful, but he had never seen anyone else. Who was she talking about? And more importantly, what were they? He turned back to her. If they're coming, why are you still here? She gave a small, almost amused smile. Because I was waiting for you. His breath caught in his throat. Waiting. For me. The way she said it sent a shiver through him. As if she had known he would arrive. As if this moment had already been decided long before he ever stepped onto this planet. The orb. The way she had appeared just as he was on the edge of collapse. The way she spoke, like she understood things he didn't. His instincts screamed that there was more to this than he could see. The alien girl took another step toward him, her gaze sharp. If you want to live, you must leave this place. Now. The man hesitated. He didn't trust her, not yet, but something in her voice, in the way her body tensed as she glanced at the horizon, told him she was telling the truth. Where do we go? He asked. She turned, pointing toward the ruins beyond the tower. There is a passage underground. If we reach it before they arrive, we might escape. The word might hung heavy in the air. The man clenched his fists. He didn't like this. He didn't like being pulled into something he didn't understand. But he had no choice. He had already made his decision when he took the orb. Taking a deep breath, he nodded. Then let's go. Without another word, the alien girl turned and started moving, her silver form barely making a sound against the dusty ground. The man followed, his heart pounding. As they disappeared into the ruins, the wind shifted. Far behind them, in the shadows of the broken towers, something moved. And the hunt began. The ruins stretched before them, a labyrinth of crumbling stone and eerie silence. The alien girl moved swiftly, her silver skin reflecting the dim light from the cracked sky. The man followed close behind, his every step fueled by the strange energy still coursing through his veins from the orb. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. The wind howled through the hollow remains of buildings, carrying whispers of a time long gone. The man couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. How much farther? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The alien girl glanced back at him. Not far, she said, but we must move quickly. They are already searching. He didn't ask who they were. He didn't need to. He could feel it now. The presence of something unseen, lurking just beyond the ruined walls. A distant sound, sharp and unnatural, echoed through the ruins. It was not the wind. It was something else. Something alive. The girl stopped suddenly, her golden eyes scanning the darkness ahead. "They are closer than I thought," she murmured. The man tightened his grip around the small rusted tool he had taken from the ruins earlier. It was barely a weapon, but it was all he had. The girl turned to him, her expression unreadable. "If they see us before we reach the passage, we won't make it." He swallowed hard. "Then let's not let them see us." She nodded once, then gestured for him to follow. They moved quickly but carefully, weaving through the ruins like ghosts. The man focused on matching her silent footsteps, stepping only where she stepped. The air was thick with tension. Every breath felt too loud. Every movement felt like it might give them away. Then suddenly, a flicker of movement. Ahead, near the entrance of what looked like an old underground station, a figure emerged from the shadows. It wasn't human. Tall and thin, its elongated limbs moved with an unnatural grace. Its body was covered in dark, chitinous armor that pulsed faintly with a sickly blue glow. The man's breath caught in his throat. The creature tilted its head slightly, as if listening. Its face was smooth, featureless, except for two deep, hollow slits where eyes should be. The girl grabbed the man's arm and pulled him down behind a broken wall. Her grip was strong, urgent. "Do not move," she whispered. "Do not even breathe." He obeyed, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might betray them. The creature stood motionless for a long moment. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, it turned and continued its patrol, disappearing into the ruins. The girl let out a quiet breath. "It has not seen us. We still have time." The man finally exhaled, his muscles aching from the tension. "What was that?" "One of them," she said. "A seeker." He clenched his jaw. "And what happens if it does see us?" She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw something close to fear in her eyes. "If it sees us," she said softly, "you will wish it hadn't." A chill ran through him. He didn't ask any more questions. They moved again, this time even more cautiously. The underground entrance was close now, just beyond the wreckage of an old transport vehicle. The girl motioned for him to wait while she checked ahead. She slipped into the shadows, vanishing almost completely. The man pressed his back against the cold stone wall, his pulse still racing. He glanced around, scanning for any sign of movement. Then, a sound behind him. A slow, deliberate scrape of something sharp against metal. His stomach dropped. He turned his head just enough to see. Another seeker. It stood just a few meters away, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, as if tasting the air. The man froze. The creature took a step closer. He could see the faint pulse of light beneath its armored skin, the strange, rhythmic glow that almost seemed alive. Another step. The man's grip tightened around the rusted tool in his hand. He knew it was useless. He knew that if this thing lunged at him, there would be nothing he could do. Still, his body tensed, preparing for the worst. Then, a distraction. A sudden noise from deeper in the ruins, a metallic crash, followed by the sound of shifting rubble. The seeker snapped its head in that direction, its glowing body stiffening. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, without warning, the creature turned and vanished into the darkness, moving with terrifying speed toward the noise. The man felt like his heart might burst from his chest. A second later, the alien girl was at his side, her hand gripping his wrist. "We have to go," she whispered. He didn't argue. They sprinted the last few meters to the underground passage, slipping inside just as another distant shriek echoed through the ruins. As the heavy door slid shut behind them, sealing them in darkness, the man let out a shaky breath. He had survived. But something told him that the real danger had only just begun. The darkness inside the underground passage was thick, almost suffocating. The man could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears, mixing with the distant sounds of the seekers moving above. Their eerie, unnatural clicks echoed through the ruins, searching, hunting. The alien girl pressed a small device against the wall, and a faint blue light flickered to life, casting an otherworldly glow on the damp metal around them. The man exhaled slowly. For now, they were safe. But for how long? He looked at the girl, her silver skin shimmering in the dim light. Where does this tunnel lead? To a place they cannot reach, she said, if we move fast. He didn't like the way she said that, like time was against them. The passage stretched deep into the earth, twisting and turning as if it had been carved in desperation. The air was thick, metallic, with a strange scent that made the man uneasy. He could feel it, the remnants of something old, something long forgotten. They walked in silence, their footsteps muffled by the soft, dust-covered floor. The deeper they went, the colder it became. He could see his breath now, forming tiny clouds in the dim blue glow. Then the girl stopped. Her golden eyes narrowed, scanning the darkness ahead. The man tensed. What is it? She didn't answer immediately. She just lifted her hand, motioning for him to stay quiet. Then he heard it too. A faint sound, like whispering, but not words. More like something breathing. Slow, deep, unnatural. The man clenched his jaw. Tell me that's not another seeker. The girl shook her head. No, she whispered. It's something else. A shiver ran down his spine. Something else. The whispering grew louder, the breathy sounds shifting, moving, circling them. But there was nothing there. Nothing he could see. Then the lights flickered. Just for a second. Just long enough for the man to feel a rush of cold air against his skin, like something had just moved past him. He spun around, his pulse racing. What was that? The girl's face was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. A memory. A fear. We need to move, she said. The man didn't argue. They started walking again, faster this time. The tunnel stretched endlessly, twisting in ways that made no sense. It felt alive. Then the girl stopped again. This time, she was looking at something ahead. A door. Massive, ancient, covered in markings that pulsed faintly with a soft blue glow. It looked untouched, as if it had been sealed for centuries. The man exhaled. Finally, an exit. But the girl didn't move. She just stared at the door, her fingers hovering over the strange symbols. What's wrong? He asked. She hesitated. This was not supposed to be here. The man frowned. What do you mean? She turned to him, her expression unreadable. This place, it is changing. The whispering returned. Louder this time. Closer. The man felt his skin crawl. The air felt heavier, like the walls themselves were watching. Then the door moved. Not much, just a small shift, like something was pressing against it from the other side. A slow, rhythmic thud followed. Something was behind that door. Something awake. The girl turned to him, urgency in her voice. Step back. He didn't argue. She pressed her palm against the glowing symbols. A low hum filled the air, and the markings began to shift, rearranging like a puzzle. The thudding on the other side grew louder, faster. Then, silence. A moment of stillness. Then, the door slammed open. A rush of freezing air blasted past them, nearly knocking the man off his feet. The blue glow intensified, flooding the tunnel with light. And then he saw it. Beyond the door was no ordinary room. It was a vast chamber, filled with towering structures that looked like pods. Hundreds of them, lined in rows, stretching into the distance. Each one pulsed faintly, casting eerie blue shadows across the chamber. The man stepped forward, his breath catching in his throat. What is this place? The girl didn't answer, because she was staring at one of the pods. And inside it, something stared back. Its eyes flickered open, glowing the same eerie blue as the symbols on the door. The whispering returned. But this time, it was speaking to him. The chamber pulsed with an eerie blue light, casting long shadows across the ancient metallic walls. The man's breath came out in short, shallow bursts as he stared at the rows of pods stretching endlessly into the darkness. His instincts screamed at him to run, but his feet remained frozen in place. The whispering sounds filled the air again, slithering into his ears like a ghostly echo. It wasn't just noise anymore. It was words. Foreign, yet familiar. The alien girl stood beside him, her golden eyes fixed on the nearest pod. Her silver skin shimmered under the soft glow as she stepped forward cautiously. The man could see the tension in her body, the slight tremble in her fingers as she reached out to touch the glass-like surface of the pod. Inside, the creature stared back. Its body was humanoid but wrong. Elongated limbs, translucent skin that pulsed with a faint blue glow, and those eyes, deep, endless voids of swirling energy. The moment her fingers touched the pod, the whispering grew louder, surrounding them like a rising storm. The symbols on the walls flickered wildly, shifting, rearranging themselves into something new. The man took a step back. What's happening? The girl didn't answer immediately. She seemed to be listening, her head tilting slightly as if deciphering the whispers. Then her expression darkened. "They're waking up," she said softly. The man's stomach twisted. "What do you mean they?" Before she could respond, the pod in front of them cracked. A jagged line split down the middle, releasing a slow stream of thick, glowing mist. The whispering turned into a chorus of overlapping voices, each one layered on top of the other, filling the air with an unnatural energy. The man's pulse pounded in his ears. Then the pod burst open. The creature inside stumbled forward, its movement jerky and unnatural. It took a deep breath, a shuddering, raspy inhale, and turned its hollow, glowing eyes toward them. The alien girl reacted instantly. She grabbed the man's wrist and pulled him backward. "We need to leave," she said, urgency in her voice. But as they turned, a new sound echoed through the chamber. More pods were opening, one after another. The entire room trembled as the awakening beings stirred, their whispering voices now forming words he could almost understand. "Release us. It has been so long. We hunger." The man's throat tightened. Then, the first creature moved. It stepped toward them, slow but deliberate. Its fingers twitched, flexing as if adjusting to their own form after centuries of stillness. Its gaze locked onto the man, unblinking. Then, without warning, it lunged. The girl shoved him aside, raising her arm. A pulse of blue energy shot from her palm, slamming into the creature's chest. It let out a horrible, distorted screech as it was thrown backward, crashing into another pod. But that was just one. Dozens more were already emerging. The chamber filled with movement, their silhouettes shifting in the dim light. Some crawled out of their pods, their bodies stretching unnaturally as they adjusted. Others stepped forward with eerie calmness, their glowing eyes focused on the two intruders. The girl turned to the man, her expression grim. "There's too many," she said. "We have to go. Now." She reached for the device at her waist, pressing a button. The symbols on the walls flared brightly, and for a brief moment, the whispering stopped. Then, the entire chamber began to collapse. The man barely had time to react before the ground beneath them shook violently. The walls cracked, sending debris crashing down. The pods that had not yet opened shattered, releasing their contents in a flood of glowing mist. The girl grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the exit. "Run." They sprinted through the collapsing chamber, dodging falling debris as the ancient structure gave way around them. The whispering voices turned into screams, filled with rage and desperation. As they neared the tunnel's entrance, the man glanced back one last time. The creatures weren't following. They were standing still, their glowing eyes fixed on him. And then, just before the walls collapsed completely, he heard one final whisper, so clear it felt like it was spoken directly into his mind. "You will return." Then, darkness. The silence was overwhelming. For a long moment, the man lay still, his body half buried beneath the rubble. The air was thick with dust and the lingering glow of the collapsing chamber. His lungs burned as he sucked in a shallow breath, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. Then, a hand grabbed his wrist. "Get up," the alien girl's voice cut through the haze. Dazed, he let her pull him to his feet. His legs wobbled, but there was no time to steady himself. The tunnel behind them was completely sealed now, buried beneath tons of ancient debris. Whatever those creatures were, they were trapped. For now. The girl's golden eyes flickered in the dim light as she scanned their surroundings. The tunnel ahead stretched into darkness, its walls humming faintly with an energy he couldn't understand. This place wasn't just old, it was alive. "We need to move," she said, urgency in her tone. "This structure isn't stable." The man swallowed hard, glancing over his shoulder. His gut told him those creatures weren't dead, just waiting. He followed her, his steps unsteady at first, but soon his instincts kicked in. The further they walked, the more the air around them changed. The cold, metallic scent of the ruins shifted into something different, something alive. Then he saw it. At the end of the tunnel, the path opened into a vast underground cavern, unlike anything he had ever seen. Massive bioluminescent trees stretched toward the ceiling, their roots glowing with an electric blue light. Strange, floating orbs drifted through the air, casting shifting patterns of light against the cavern walls. In the center of it all, a single towering monolith stood, covered in the same symbols they had seen inside the ruins. But the strangest thing was the pulse. It wasn't sound. It wasn't light. It was something deeper, something that vibrated through his bones, through his very soul. It felt like the heartbeat of a god. The girl stiffened. He could see it in her face. She recognized this place. "You know what this is, don't you?" he asked, his voice low. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped forward, her gaze locked on the monolith. "This is what they were protecting," she whispered. The man's skin prickled. "Who?" She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "The ones in the pods. The ones we left behind." A chill ran down his spine. He hadn't forgotten their glowing eyes, their hollow whispers. He hadn't forgotten the last words that had echoed in his mind before the ruins collapsed. "You will return." His fists clenched. "Then why are we still here?" The girl hesitated. Then, slowly, she raised her hand toward the monolith. The second her fingers brushed against its surface, the cavern shook. The bioluminescent trees flickered wildly, their roots pulsing with energy. The floating orbs darted away like startled birds. The air itself crackled, filled with an invisible force that made the man's skin crawl. And then, a voice. Not whispered, not broken. A voice that commanded, "Who dares awaken the void?" The monolith's surface rippled, like liquid metal shifting under unseen hands. Symbols moved, rearranging themselves into something more recognizable. A message. The alien girl inhaled sharply. "It's a warning." The man took a cautious step closer. A warning for what? The cavern trembled again. The pulse grew louder, faster. The tree's glow turned an ominous red. Then the symbols finished shifting, and the message became clear. They were never prisoners. They were guardians. And now, they are free. The man's blood ran cold. Before he could speak, a distant roar echoed through the tunnels behind them. Not mechanical, not human. Something had followed them. The girl grabbed his arm. "We need to run." But the man didn't move. His eyes were locked on the monolith, on the final line of the message. A final sentence, written in the universal language of fear. "The void is awake." The cavern pulsed with raw energy, its eerie glow casting long, shifting shadows across the walls. The message on the monolith burned in his mind. The void is awake. The roar that had echoed through the tunnels moments ago still lingered in the air, vibrating in his bones. Whatever was coming, it wasn't human, and it wasn't friendly. The alien girl's grip tightened around his wrist. "We don't have time to stand here." But he couldn't tear his eyes away from the monolith. It wasn't just a piece of stone. It was something else, something alive. He could feel it watching him, measuring him, waiting. Then the symbols on its surface shifted again, forming new words. "You must choose." His breath hitched. Choose what? Before he could get an answer, the cavern shook violently. A second roar, closer, deeper. The floating orbs scattered like frightened birds, blinking out one by one. The bioluminescent trees swayed, their glowing roots writhing like living tendrils. Then he saw them. Dark figures, emerging from the far tunnel. Not the ones from before. These were different. Larger. Hungrier. Their eyes glowed like molten stars, their elongated limbs moving in unnatural ways, like shadows bending against the laws of reality. The girl sucked in a sharp breath. Voidborn. His stomach twisted. "You know them." She didn't answer. Her entire body was rigid, her golden eyes locked on the creatures now slinking toward them. The way they moved, slow and deliberate, sent a chill down his spine. Predators. "We can't outrun them," she muttered. His pulse pounded. "Then what do we do?" She hesitated, then turned back to the monolith. "We answer the call." Before he could stop her, she pressed her palm flat against its surface. The moment her skin made contact, the cavern exploded with light. A force unlike anything he had ever felt rushed through him, lifting him off the ground. His mind was flooded with images, planets burning, ancient wars, towering beings standing against an endless void. And then, a voice. Not the one from before. This one was different. Deeper. Older. "You are not ready." The light intensified. The creatures, voidborn, screeched, their bodies twisting in agony. The cavern walls rippled like liquid, as if the entire space was being rewritten. The girl clenched her jaw. "We don't have a choice." The voice didn't respond. Instead, the monolith symbols rearranged once more, this time forming a single word. "Prove." And just like that, the light vanished. The weight of gravity returned, slamming him back to the cavern floor. The girl staggered beside him, breathing hard. The Voidborn, however, weren't suffering anymore. They were advancing. The largest one, standing at least 10 feet tall, opened its jagged mouth, and from it came a sound that wasn't a roar anymore. It was laughter. The man's chest tightened. "That's not normal." The girl's hands curled into fists. "They know we're weak." The Voidborn took another step forward. Then another. Then the monolith reacted. A deep hum resonated through the cavern. The ground trembled beneath them, and from the monolith's surface, something emerged. A weapon. Not metal. Not stone. Energy. It hovered in the air before them. A spear, its blade pulsating with a strange cosmic force. The girl's eyes widened. A celestial armament. The Voidborn hesitated. The man didn't. Before he could think, before fear could take hold, his hand shot forward. And the moment his fingers wrapped around the weapon's shaft, his vision burned white. Power unlike anything he had ever known surged through his veins. His senses expanded. He could feel everything. The breath of the creatures, the pulse of the monolith, the whisper of something far beyond the cavern. And then clarity. He understood. The monolith wasn't just a relic. It was a test. And now, the real battle had begun.